Lesson 6.1 is continued as we look at evidence that supports life, and it continues to change. So as we already mentioned, Darwin had some ideas and questions that he had, and so he needed to collect evidence to support what he was thinking about life changing and that life shares a common ancestor. So he collected evidence, and I have them in two categories: non-living evidence, which includes fossils, and living evidence. And some of these things Darwin did not know, and I will point those out as we go through. The first thing is information about fossils. So hopefully you recall from earth science about fossils and how layers of the earth over time of sediment buildup and different things that have happened. For example, volcanic ash here. So volcanic eruptions and different changes in the earth lead to the ability to actually date the rocks. So relative dating is a process where you basically say younger layers are at the top, older layers at the bottom. So depending upon where you find fossils, you can potentially figure out their age. The other opportunity is to use radioactive dating. When a piece of the fossil is burned, it's converted into carbon dioxide gas, and then I use a radiation counter to basically help it identify the age. And that's basically because all living things contain carbon. So, and they accumulate, receive a carbon-14, which is radiocarbon, during their lifetimes. So that is going to help this process. So we use those methods to date fossils that we found. And we want to review some important terms like the term extinct. We can look at organisms that once lived that are no longer here to try to figure out at what point in our history that they actually became extinct. The next is living evidence. So Darwin looked at comparative anatomy, which the two terms we want to pay attention to are homologous structures. So they're structures that have same or similar parts because they have a common ancestor. So here we have the forearm of a human, a horse, a cat, a bat, a bird, and a whale. And we look at their similar numbers of bones, similar structures. Now there's definitely, obviously, differences, but they have a similar parts and they have a common ancestor. This is in contrast to analogous structures, which are similar solutions to similar problems, but they don't indicate relatedness. For example, a bird and a butterfly both fly, but their structures are not indicating a relationship. They may just have a similar function, like flying. Homologous structures, I showed a few more: skeleton of a human and a chimpanzee. Then I'm also going to jump back to a different example I have that shows organ systems of a cat, a dog, and a human in the similar organ structure and systems. So the next type of evidence we want to talk about are vestigial structures. They're remnant structures, things that may have had a purpose at one point in the ancestors, but have no clear function in modern species. So we have a few examples that I went over, and the first one's an appendix. So when we talk about that it may have had an important function, it does have an important function in digesting herbivorous diets with plants, but there's not any current need for it, and therefore if your appendix is if it becomes infected, it can be removed and you're fine. So biologists believe it was a vestigial organ or something that's got left behind from a plant-eating ancestor. And this indicated to Darwin, vestigial structures indicated that there may have been a function in a different species that no longer existed. So if we take a look, again, I have a few other examples that I wanted to share. A vestigial organ of the wings in flightless birds, leg bones in whales, body hair, especially in humans, like it's potentially a remnant, the human tailbone or the coccyx, and wisdom teeth. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that, you can find these paragraphs or information. You can search about vestigial organs. And the next form of evidence is comparative embryology. Darwin took a look at embryos, and this is actually a very current field. It's called evo-devo, or evolutionary development, where scientists are looking at when genes are turned on and off during development of embryos. And this is something that you can see in stage 1, the similarities, and then different genes must be turned on and off. And it's important to mention that Darwin did not understand genes or heredity information. He and Mendel, while researching some at the same times, did not have access to each other's work. So comparing DNA, this is again something Darwin did not have access to. We didn't know really the structure of the DNA until 1950s, but when we do know today that by comparing DNA of different organisms, we can determine evolutionary relationships. So essentially, the more DNA in common, the more closely related or shared common ancestor. There's a computer program called BLAST that helps enter genetic information or DNA and then build a common ancestry it's phylogeny. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end of this unit. And then last form of living evidence is something called biogeography. And it's evidence that suggests that where organisms live has something to do with adaptations that they have or how they've evolved. So we take a look. Some classic examples are Darwin's finches. This adaptive radiation based on what food is available on the different islands versus the camels and where they live and what the climate and different situation is in that environment. Tomorrow, we're going to talk more about mechanisms of evolution and how this evidence, how Darwin proposed this evidence that he had actually, how evolution happened.